Might kick off. Welcome to the 4th DAO Day Workshop now. I think that counts for a 1-month anniversary of us doing these things. I join you today from Gadigal land in Sydney CBD. Oh gosh, look at that crypto language getting into my vernacular. I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like everybody to understand that they are being recorded today, and if you have any concerns with being seen or heard or your words in the chat shared, please let me know at jp@lawfidao.com and we'll make sure that those are edited out for you. You can make that request at any time. It's not a set and forget. So today, I also want to remind us of our culture and values. You know, what are the beliefs that we want to see demonstrated in our everyday actions with LawFi DAO? So those are respect and reciprocity, the integrity and kindness while we're doing things differently, and being appreciative that time is our most precious resource. So with that said, I really want to thank people for making the time on the call today. I'm seeing some new faces, which is great, and some people that have been coming regularly. So it's nice to see a community building around LawFi DAO. Again, I'm going to spend sort of the first half hour providing an update over what's happened in the past week and what's the rough plan for the week ahead. But please feel free to jump in, put your hand up, or put a note in the chat so that I can see you and direct the conversation to you. And then the back half an hour of this is again going to be devoted to answering general questions from the community. I've already had a question submitted from a person who would like to be anonymous around SAFTs, so simple agreement for future tokens, as well as general token investments in projects that are in trouble and look like they're going to fail, and what are the SAFT holders' rights, so to speak. These are the questions that are going around, and the person thought that the community, the broader community, could benefit from having a discussion around rights in that respect. So please think of any other questions that you might want to contribute, either in your own name or anonymously today or in the future. So in the past week, it's been quite administrative heavy, actually. We've gone through our first round of accepting membership application forms. Again, there's been a few teething problems with that we're working on. As at a few days ago, we had received about 29 membership applications, which the committee reviewed and approved. We have to do that under the rules of our DAO before a member is accepted. And the initial emails went out to confirm membership applications received, and then to confirm the membership once the committee had approved it. And we've also set up our LawFi DAO Treasury wallet through using the Gnosis Safe as a multisig. So delighted to see Shane on the call, our treasurer. Welcome, Shane. I'll throw to you in a second. But we're already seeing some ETH being deposited into the Treasury wallet, and some Aussie dollars into the bank account, which I've said is in my name. On that note, supporting information has been provided, and some educative support as well, to a token exchange as well as to an Australian banking provider to help open the name of accounts in the LawFi DAO. So as those processes are completed and we have the permission to share really what information they required to be comfortable to open accounts, and I'm hopeful that they will, that will be shared back. And this forum, this community call forum, will become more and more high level. From next week, we have all of the subcommittee sessions starting, except the pay to rely one is the week after. And in each of those subcommittees will be more dedicated and focused discussions for the working group topics and the scopes of each subcommittee. So only really for today and next week will you be receiving quite detailed updates in this forum, and the other subcommittee sessions will be recorded so that you can catch up on things that are of interest to you. So we've had 10 people fully paid up across receipts into the wallet versus the bank account, and they have received the V1 membership tax invoice and receipt. So this is administrative, but it's worth, I think, some celebration, because just figuring out the format of what that should look like, going into the Australian GST rules, coming up with a template for that other DAO projects can leverage when they're accepting membership fees. For those that have received their membership tax invoice and receipt, feedback is welcome because it is the V1. But tied up in that process, I had a call with the Australian Business Register to note my concerns about the questionnaire in applying for an ABN. And as you know, we were refused on the 4th of July, but based on my discussion with the representative, we agreed that I would reapply. So we've now successfully obtained an ABN, and we can do business in an easier sense in Australia. But it came with some trade-offs in not being completely honest in those responses to the questionnaire. And so at the same time that the application was remade, an objection has been lodged for consideration by the Australian Tax Office as to the grounds of objection. So I'm going to very quickly share my screen, but these materials will all be posted through at least JIRA, so that's with Confluence, our document management and our resource, so that members can see and have the benefit of the thinking gone by. I think I will pause at this moment to see and just to test with those on the call. Do you think these sorts of materials should be available more broadly or just to members at this stage? Does anybody have any strong feelings about that?
I think just to add that point, that if people know now at this stage that what this DAO is for, or what is the entire objective, so it will be good to share with wider audience about the working group so they know what is exactly going on and can participate in their topic of interest.
Yeah, and we see that with some other DAO projects, and even projects that just start as Discord servers. It's open access for the first few months, and then it becomes a token gated thing. So good suggestion, Nupur. Well, then
Joni.
Gordon, yes.
Joni, yeah, it's something that I'm following in the Stacks blockchain at the moment and learning a lot about the open source side of it. So, and trying to dive into what is public and what's not. From what I can see, 90%, or like nearly everything's public and open source. In GitHub, you can, and it's really important to them to have it very open source. But there must be some sort of management decisions which are not open source.
Mm. Yeah, and probably the other side to that is, so in drafting that membership tax invoice and receipt, to the side of it, I had begun drafting GST and income tax advice to the DAO as if I was its lawyer. And so that is still a work in progress, and it hasn't even been shared. You know, I'm not in a position to share it on this call even, but that starts to go into what is the case law for income tax purposes. When, at what point are you carrying on a business? And that's, you know, an exercise that we go to the law, but also to the case law. And then from a GST perspective, when do we start carrying on an enterprise? And where we're required to be registered or can voluntarily register for GST. So that separate advice, I think, probably needs to remain only seen by the committee initially, and perhaps even the establishment subcommittee, and then we decide whether to release it and the appropriate disclaimers. And And so both the establishment subcommittee will need to consider that, as well as the pay to rely, if that in itself becomes a pay to rely product. The other thing that has sparked my imagination is it's so manual. And if I was a normal business, Xero would have provided me with the functionality to be generating invoices straight away, and I wouldn't have had to look into it really or question whether I'm carrying on a business in Australia and for how long, and continually revisit the eligibility requirements. And so I wondered, is there a smart contract application out there already which is sort of like a CRM where it can manage for us the membership, all of the things that each of you have agreed to, accepting the payment, at least to the Treasury wallet, and then giving you your transaction record, or even a receipt token that documents the terms of your membership and generates your membership tax invoice and receipt. Electra, you look like you're aware of something.
Yeah, I saw your email. I haven't replied to it yet. But yeah, exactly, and that's what I'm dedicated to trying to solve as a digital business accountant for 20 years, trying to solve this in Web3. And there are some good tools out there, or there might be ways to sort of piece together, some Web2, Web3 systems, and with add-on payment systems that incorporate. But look, or you could just go to a full built solution for DAOs. There would be a cost. So it just depends. You want to set up on what you'll need to use. So you need to have an idea of what you're scaling to and set up on the right system first. Or like Jotform, you can integrate to take payment to generate an invoice after submitting the membership form. That's possible, but is that going to be a crypto payment system? Will we be able to use our wallets with it? And will it take us that one step further into Jira? Could the membership form come from Jira? So our details are being brought into Jira at first, or does the committee need to do that vetting with a form that's outside the official system, one by one? But what about when you're dealing with 1,000 members a week?
Yeah, so the numbers are still small, thankfully, but
we can,
but I until we appoint a membership manager or somebody to help us move through that volume, it's still quite a manual exercise, and then adding each person to Jira to provide them with access once all of those steps are completed. So I think, Electra, in our establishment subcommittee, we could at least put our minds to the requirements, and some research, tasking some people to see what's breadcrumbs are out there that we could pull together, even existing smart contracts that could help us. I notice, Shane, were you nodding in agreement, or did you have any initial thoughts on that?
No, something that can integrate everything and make it very seamless from our end, or from an accounting and from a treasury perspective would be fantastic. As little manual entry as possible, please.
Yeah, no, I agree, definitely. So it was just quite educative, actually, to think how many times I had to stop and pause because it's a DAO and not just a very simple company structure. So we're already facing the headwinds, and we're trying to make this simpler for more people to think about establishing their DAOs. So then the membership form, again, there's a few updates to be made to it now that we have our Treasury wallet address, so that will be done shortly. We've had already some great feedback on this initial decision of mine to start as an unincorporated association, but based on, the Victorian model rules for an incorporated association. So this is a topic that we're going to dive deep into in the first establishment subcommittee session next week. And so we've got Miles on the call. Give a wave to everybody. Comes to us with a vast amount of experience in not-for-profit law across those mutuals and unincorporated associations. And Andrew Walton, who I'm not sure is on the call today. Oh, there you are. Great. Who also brings decades or at least 1 decade of experience in co-ops. So thank you to you both. We're really looking forward to that. And we're going to break down the elements of what went into my decision, which at a very high level was to start with the rules that the Victorian regulator, so to speak, is familiar with when we go through the process of taking an unincorporated association to attempt to register as an incorporated association, and trying to get past those pecuniary benefit tests. So based on our tokenomics model or proposed tokenomics model, whether we would pass a basic registration for incorporation or not, which gets you into the next level of regulation, which most DAOs may not actually want to sign up for, but they may be required to based on the state and territory or whatever jurisdictions laws there are around unincorporated associations and the times at which you need to incorporate. So I'll just pause. Miles and Andrew, did you want to give any brief comments today as a sort of whet your appetite for anybody on the fence about joining the establishment subcommittee? Andrew,
I haven't got anything to add. No, I think you've covered it well, Joni.
Thanks, Andrew. Miles?
Yeah, no, absolutely fascinating area. I'm looking forward to a animated and robust discussion. Yeah.
It will be. It's almost like a moot court for lawyers and defending different types of structures. So bring your popcorn, perhaps. Okay, so then you might have seen that all of the subcommittee session times have been posted on the website, all registrations through Eventbrite. And really that's just to get us through to the end of the year. We'll close out all of the sessions a week before Australian Christmas and then look to recommence late January, I suspect, so that we can all have a break with our families and friends. And so that you can decide and put in your diaries and make your commitments around Friday being DAO days and what other work you might need to do during the week to prepare for whatever you've decided to contribute. So in the coming week, the focus is finalising this 0.01 version of the white paper for community discussion, and then to really tear apart in the establishment subcommittee and applying to be a registered incorporated association in Victoria to kick that process off. I suspect, excuse me, it may take a couple of weeks for that application to be acknowledged and then us taken through the process. So with the benefit of our early discussions in the establishment subcommittee, all of that can be brought to bear as we go through the official process. And then Miles and Andrew, and even Electra, actually, because you've been through the process with Digital Playhouse Foundation, us deciding at which point we may seek to put in an ACNC application if all or part of our activities might be appropriate to be covered under a registered charity type status.
It hasn't been too bad. It took a long time to get registered, but there was no argument on getting an ABN because it was a company.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. I'll just on that note, sorry to detract, but I just had a quick question because we joined as an entity, as a company, and just on the membership form, if we join as a company, Gordon's asked this, who and what representatives can participate? Do the directors need to complete anything else? I was the only responsible person, but Gordon here is also wanting to participate under our company, and so I guess we just need to sort of take that.
Yeah, these questions have, there's a few corporates wanting to be members, so to speak, and there's sort of a main representative person of the organisation, but a number of other staff also want to be representatives, but not necessarily the authorised one. And so I haven't worked through a process for that yet, but was just thinking that for those companies, it was really a direction on the membership form to, in the free text field, say the supervising or the authorised representative is Electra Frost, but Gordon also can be added as a representative and can contribute with the permission of all of the directors or the officers of whoever the company member is. But I think, you know, from that company perspective, you probably need your own processes then to make sure that the supervisor is across all of the contributions being made by all of the representatives. So no objections, just a
policy that we need to go through. Okay, I'll chat about that with Gordon. Thank you.
Yeah, and the related note to that is where people also want to contribute in their individual capacity when their company is a member. So again, I'm already seeing one law firm and one other organisation, I won't name them, they're going through their processes to figure out what consents the employee needs to give or statements the employee needs to make that they're not acting in the capacity of an employee if they've also joined as an individual, and being very careful around their contributions. Yeah, good questions though. So next week is also a lot of time just arranging speakers for each subcommittee kickoff session. So enough experts in those working group streams that we've got quite a good introduction to the concepts that we're going to have to grapple with within each subcommittee. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those scopes, they're all on the Eventbrite page. I probably will copy them across to another web page in the website so that it's easy to access. But if there is any experts or people with the experience you feel is relevant to contribute to those topics, more than happy to be introduced to them and give them a briefing about LawFi DAO to see if they're comfortable to share some time and that we can leverage from. Okay. Oh, Gordon, did you have a question?
Yeah, was there I hadn't read all the detail in those subcommittees. Was there an intention to just have a limited number of people in those subcommittees?
Not at this stage, because I wasn't expecting thousands of people to apply. So the numbers are capped on Eventbrite at 20 or 30. So there is the actual specified limit. I don't think that we'll get to that. From the registrations I'm seeing so far, the top one has about 10 to 15 people.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah. So no trouble joining at this stage.
it's probably more, there's going to be obviously some people with excellent expertise. And then there's obviously other people that'll just be the doers and enacting things. So it'd be good to see people with the expertise being the leaders. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and even in the membership form so far, people are responding to say the skills that they're willing to contribute, from minute taking to assistance with project management and the substantive skills. So I'm just pulling that together as well and trying to allocate them across interests and subcommittees for a lot of support. So Miles, I saw your hand up, and then we'll go to Nupur.
Yeah, just the Australian Law Reform Commission has just, well, it seems to have established a officer and a unit with respect to looking at DAOs, and I'm going to speak to the officer next Friday at about 2 p.m. So I wonder if he might, or he or she might be a person to invite to this.
Absolutely.
DAO.
Would love to have them.
The other thing is that I've made contact with, because I know the Charities Minister well and his staff, I've made contact with them after their press release to get their key advisor in this area to see whether they're interested as well.
Oh, great work, Miles. I think it definitely starts with welcoming them in, making them feel that this is a safe space to learn about DAOs and even to experiment with some of their policy recommendations. Nupur.
Now, I have a couple of questions. In terms of working group, there are subcommittees and there will be working group, right? This is what I understand.
Yes, at least in V1 of our governance, yes.
And now currently there is one working group. Is it so? Or like we are planning for more working group, and these working group are more of a research-based working group. So we will be picking up topics, whatever going on around the world, and those people will be working on one specific area.
You can contribute as much time as you like. You're not limited to any one area. It's across the 4 subcommittees, each of them have, you know, I think the pay to rely will have 4 or 5 working group streams in the beginning. The establishment can have as many as 8 or 9 working groups. So we'll start with a lot of the tasks dealt with by the main subcommittee, so to speak, and as it gets larger or as there are bespoke tasks identified, we can form a specific working group around it so that they've got SMART goals, so to speak, specific measurable things to contribute back to the subcommittee for approval and then discussion in these in the subcommittee and then more broadly in the community calls. When we do get some mechanism in place with our membership token and we can actually put votes in place, whether on-chain or off-chain, we will start to have better records of our governance and the proposals being put up, but it's still quite fluid at the moment, Nupur.
Okay, so, I wanted to understand the purpose. So I'm not clear with the purpose. So what we are trying to achieve with the working group is to focus more on the research side of all the legislation going around DAO, or what is the purpose of different working?
It's for discussion in the first subcommittee meeting where we'll define the scope of the working groups in more detail. But based on your level of commitment and your experience and what you can contribute. Because I can go and specify a very detailed scope and there could be nobody that's interested in doing that. So we've got to come up with it together. It feels half-baked and earlier than I would like to, but this is part of the experiment of developing the scopes together and not something that perhaps comes from me as an ask from the community. We develop it together and we do it together as much as we can.
And the registration will be as a charity or in future. So what is the ultimate goal? Is it like we'll be going for a non-profit organization, charity, or what is your thought in mind for this?
Well, I'm actually very interested to hear from Miles' perspective on this one, because I am not a not-for-profit expert, and it's really the key purpose is educative. So if it's appropriate for LawFi DAO, like all of our activities or a small part of them, to go through a registration process with the ACNC to be a charity and then to benefit from the tax concessions that may flow from that, that's a discussion that we still need to have. It's not certain that we will go through that process, but if it's appropriate, then that's something that other DAOs that have a not-for-profit purpose can leverage from later. Yeah, Miles and Electra, did you want to add anything to that at this stage?
Yeah, it took a while. I'd recommend, using someone who really, we used a consultant who dealt with the ACNC for us, because it took us 9 months to get approved. It was quite, and we're very grateful for your help along the way, Joni. And then it just, looking at the different options, how we could structure, but we were determined to have the charity for reasons. It suits what we're doing, and we felt it was the right platform from which to launch our DAO eventually. So.
Yeah, and the related consideration is when you've got some overseas activities with your charity, you step up in terms of the ACNC's governance standards, so that there's a whole extra suite of templates that they provide to make sure that you know what activities are happening overseas, are they consistent with your purposes? And that may be, for an early DAO, that still might be too much burden or too stifling to experiment with the technology innovation that you are trying to bring to the world, which is still as a net public good, it brings a net public benefit. Yes, the charity status would bring legitimacy and recognition and further governance templates that you can leverage from, but that's a trade-off as to whether it is good for the innovation you're bringing or actually a net detriment. So all of those things I do hope to stress test in our subcommittee sessions in the establishment subcommittee.
I think it depends upon the ultimate goal. Like we have to list down what will be the next year goal for 3-4 years for the DAO. So based on that, it will be better to decide. Maybe some people may have conflict of interest if it is not a DAO or if it is not a charity or not profit organization. So yeah, so it needs to be discussed.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, our ACNC approval was quite broad in that it's just to advance public and social welfare. So instead of being for the individual, so it's we're very happy with what we got approved as.
And
Yeah.
that might just be a sort of one of the projects of the charity rather than the and a restructure of the charity. So we're still working that out because, as you say, yeah, it looks like a lot of work to turn a charity with ACNC into a DAO. So we're looking at other ways to do that. All part of the experimenting and learning, isn't it?
It definitely is. Now, I'm going to very quickly share, because I'm in a hotel, I don't have my second screen. Can you see the screen I'm sharing, the membership tax invoice and receipt?
Yep.
Okay, so very quickly, if you haven't already received this is what's to come once you pay your membership fee. We have to disclose the details of us as a supplier. So LawFi DAO, the nature of the entity, we now do have an ABN, and the registered office here, this is money that has been spent from the DAO Treasury bank account, because obviously for privacy reasons, I don't want to disclose my residential address, which is predominantly where a lot of the physical activity of the DAO is being carried out at the moment. That's at a cost of I think it was $49 per month. So again, one of the more affordable options, but a necessary one for privacy from my perspective. The basic details of date, the fact that this is my company, Blockchain and Digital Assets, country of residence in Australia. Now I'll come back to this because it's important that I've just put the country rather than my address or any ACN or ABN details of my company. The description of the supply, the fact that we are an Australian-based organisation at the moment, but we're denominating things in US dollars. Shane, as our treasurer, is going to have a lot of fun with this and whether we, for accounting and tax purposes, decide to make functional currency elections. Because if we do want to be truly global, do we accept that the US dollar is the more familiar currency to interact with? That's my experience so far. A lot is denominated in US dollars or USDC. And then for the payment receipt purposes, there has been the conversion or the amount that was received into the bank account stated here, so that when the accounts are prepared in Australian dollar terms, we've got an easy record. But these are the statements that are not usually put on an invoice and receipt, but are there to help educate people as they come in as members if they take the time to read it. So just calling out why we're not collecting member identity information, and that goes to the fact that the membership fee is less than $1,000. If it was over, we would be required to collect the identity and the ABN details. So there's a learning in that when setting the amount of the membership fee. And equally, it's not a low value transaction for Australian GST purposes. So we don't have to provide an invoice and receipt straight away. We really only have to wait until we're requested based on the value of our membership fee. But if it was below this 75 or 82.50 inclusive of GST, then there's no administration in a sense. So that also could help in setting membership fee levels. Then the ABN and GST note here is for full disclosure. It gives you the grounds of objection to the ABN refusal notice and really calls into question this: are you doing things that are consistent with running a business? So all of the main indicators which are in the italicised text, those are provided by the Australian Business Register, and it says you must compare your activities with these main indicators to determine whether you are carrying on a business and effectively meet the eligibility requirements. So from A to E, these are the high level reasons as to why a DAO either doesn't meet those tests initially, or it will, it's not a static assessment. You will continue to have to revise whether it meets the eligibility conditions, which is another onerous compliance burden for founders of a DAO and for the core contributors who are involved. So just calling out a few, it's that there's no intention for recurrent and regular nature of activities. And to be more specific, that's human activities. And the italicised text doesn't really draw this distinction between activities carried on by humans and human management teams versus autonomous technology. But I think it is worthy of note. And then, you know, I'll let you all read for yourselves, and we can buff this out in the establishment committee and based on the feedback that we get through the objection process. So that's that one. And then this is a copy of the objection that was lodged yesterday. So there's a bit of formality around the things that you need to do, the format and style that the ATO requires, the grounds of objection, the refusal notice, and that we're confirming that the document is true and correct with a signature. So yeah, that material can be shared openly. I really like the recommendations of Nupur and Gordon. It seemed like a lot of people were nodding during the call. So I'll stop sharing that now. And before I get to the anonymous SAFT question, did anybody have thoughts or feelings on what we've gone through today, or general questions? John, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a question, Janie. There is an ABN now, is that?
Yes, correct. But the issue is I've potentially made a false and misleading statement in clicking yes to are you carrying on a business that meets these indicators, which can result in liability to me. So for the purposes of getting an ABN, I clicked yes, but it's not me being completely honest in that questionnaire, which is why we've lodged an objection to state why I'm uncomfortable with the response.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but the discussion with the Australian Business Register representative was trying to take a reasonable approach so that the DAO could do business in Australia. So we couldn't turn on the payment function in JOT form because we didn't have an ABN. And that's why it's a more manual process, that you're directed on the form to the wallet address or the bank account. We couldn't connect with payment providers. So that friction, a lot of the first 29 members have felt. and so hopefully it gets easier after that. But yeah, so we've got the ABN for ease of doing business, and so as not to be aggressive, but just reasonably trying to interact with the existing business and payment systems in Australia.
But any DAO will have this problem.
Yes, they will. And most haven't even applied for an ABN.
And you haven't applied for a GST with it, so.
Yeah, not that.
Reason.
And that's on the basis that I don't expect yet that we'll have more than $75,000 of income from membership fees yet. Maybe that changes if we get a flood of applications next week.
I just suggest, Jamie, that with the invoice going out to members, that say invoice, not tax invoice then.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. You're right, good pick up. Okay, Varun.
A quick question on the non-technical side. Initial discussion when you mentioned that how much do we keep open to non-members versus members, etc. Just to understand, what would motivate people to be to join as members? Obviously, it is going to be a charity thing, and we want people to come in and help out of goodwill, etc. But just if it's going to be an open system, is there any benefit to coming in as a member, and how do we, because obviously there are going to be costs and there are going to be things for which people coming in as member and giving in membership fees, etc., helps us to grow the purpose. So how will that work?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. My initial impression is that you will still get access to more things in JIRA and have the ability for your name or the form in which you've joined as a member to be listed as a contributor to the document, and then as a co-author to the extent that any intellectual property is created and then it's licensed and it becomes a pay-to-rely product. So a person that has contributed on these calls, for example, or said something on our social media, but they're not a member, we can't properly attribute them to working on the product. So they would essentially lose out on potential pay-to-rely streams to the extent that they're not a member and they haven't contributed within the framework that we've put around it.
So mainly one question. So are we saying that we are a research organization sort of thing? We want to educate and do more of research in the law or tax field? Is that our purpose?
Yeah, the key purposes are threefold, and one of them is this educative experiment to educate policymakers, judges, the legal profession, other professions, what is a DAO or what it comes to be known by. And it can be a bit confusing because we're doing that while creating our own DAO. So we're not, in a sense, beginning at square one with the MakerDAO protocol and saying, if I was a lawyer, if I was a group of lawyers, how would we have done this from a compliant legal perspective in Australia, where we're also creating our own products and services and operational network and community. So there is the educative output, which is a purpose, output, which is a purpose, but then there is also the business building or the DAO building of LawFi DAO. So, and those purposes are certainly to introduce the ways of doing things differently in law and in policy, so that we're all moving in step to lift the standards internationally without defaulting to needing law reform, that we lift the best practice standards by demonstrating it through the LawFi DAO.
Yeah, understood. So the main purpose, even when you say from business side, would be always to focus more on the research and business research and the policy side, and to educate people. Maybe different, of course, there can be multiple ways to it, but that will be the main goal. Like I can take the example of IBFD. Let's take example of IBFD. Can I say that, okay, we want to achieve 5% of what they are doing? Something like this?
5% of what? Who's doing? Sorry, I just missed that.
I took the example of IBFD. So is it like, okay, we want to form a research organization, something like IBFD? You're familiar with IBFD, right?
No, sorry.
Okay.
IBFG?
IBFD. International Fiscal Association. This is from Amsterdam. So I'll send you the link.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd answer it with the establishment subcommittee. We've got to work on how we establish this DAO in the most legally and tax compliant way, or where are the grey areas for which we should make objections and clarify the operation of existing law, and where there are gaps that are worthy of policy reform. But the actual policy exercises and research groups, you know, the UK Law Commission stream that's already started, being led by Iris Rad, the policy work is a working group of the community building subcommittee. So that's something that we can build a community around. You don't have to be working on the operational aspects of establishment or the pay to rely model or the membership token, but in the community building subcommittee, you can take part in that UK working group, and there'll be other working groups that form from a policy and research perspective. And that's how you might be part of this community and contribute to policy globally, but you're not perhaps focused on the operational aspects of building LawFi DAO.
Understood. That helps.
Yeah. Dojo.
Sorry. One additional question. So for the working group, is it like somebody has to give proposal and then the working group goes on? So how is the working group topic selected?
That was Iris Rad volunteering that she would like to spend the time coordinating a group to discuss that 550-page consultation paper and to prepare a submission. So it came as a volunteer effort from a community member, and so she's leading that. And if you want to join that subcommittee, you can elect to be co-chair or take a bigger role if you like. The governance is quite fluid because nothing is formalized, or we don't have really more than 4 weeks of effort together. So it's for us to define initially.
Yeah, and that goes for other working groups also. Like somebody wants to propose another working group for some other topic, so that goes in a fluid manner now, right? So we'll have new, yeah.
At the moment, yes. Dojo, Pact.
Good morning, Joni. I think we've moved on a little while from where I put my hand up. It was just in response to your final question to say whether anybody had questions or comments about the stuff we've covered. I don't have a question so much as a comment, and I was just going to say from my experience dealing primarily offshore, as soon as we start integrating with anyone offshore, we'll all want to forget that AUD exists entirely. That's kind of what I found. So just passing that back as a feedback to your statement about the currency.
Yeah, it's I completely agree with you. Completely agree. Okay, so I'm just going to address Gordon. The purposes set out in the LawFi DAO rules are there. They are on the website. I know some people have been having issues, mostly from the Google Chrome browser, trying to download that PDF. I'm hearing that it's okay if you try a different browser, and I'm not sure why Google Chrome doesn't like our rules. But I'm continuing to look into it to make sure that there's an easier solution for you to access the rules. Okay, well, I'll get into this question for SAFTs. So just to read it out, in traditional startups and funding agreements, winding down is often looked at as a graceful finish to a project that is failing to find product market fit. Projects and DAOs that raise funding via SAFTs are not typically able to do this before launching their token, which is bad for both investors and initial contributors on a protocol if the market shifts, if regulations change, if you're on those shifting sands. So this raises a few questions. Are SAFTs as rigid as the industry believes? If a team does not launch a token but returns as much investor funds as possible, is that an acceptable outcome? Could or should SAFTs be antiquated in the future? And then the second question is, as people know, smart contracts and tokens are quite difficult to shut down, unlike a typical product. So how should projects plan to wind down in the event that things don't pan out or risk becoming too great? And the example of Tribe and Faye recently has been given. So I'll just start with a bit of a backdrop. As SAFTs really came about as a product of the US as a way to raise capital without meeting the requirements of you issuing a security under the Howey test. So other countries have, it's not so clear that a SAFT is the appropriate mechanism, but because it was so widely adopted in the US, it almost became a norm. So in Australia, we don't really have the same style of SAFT that the US does, but they're really what boils down to a very, very simple agreement with no promises other than the fact that for your money, and it might be US dollars or it might be USDC or ETH that is the payment, there is a promise to pay some amount of tokens in the future. So simple agreement for future tokens, and that there may be a rough calculation to say your $100 will be 0.001 of the token supply when the actual tokenomics are finalized. And so this can take a few different variations. If a project has a finite token supply, like 10 million, that can be quite simple to calculate. But if they have an elastic token supply, like we've seen in some of the algorithmic stablecoin models, it becomes a little bit more difficult to establish what that clear percentage should be for the capital that's being contributed at the SAFT stage. And so the complexity of a SAFT really depends on how well progressed the tokenomics model is at the time of raise. But unlike a share subscription agreement or a subscription document to acquire units in a trust, there's no representations and warranties given about the good character and good standing of the company or the individuals in it, their compliance record, no commitments to even complete the project. There's actually a lot of risk being taken on by the person that gives the money under a SAFT. It's been described to me as you're shutting your eyes and hoping for the life of whatever religion that you believe in, that it's going to pan out. And it is highly risky venture. So because they're so simple, a lot of them that I've seen don't deal with that you have the right to return of capital, which is a typical thing that you have when you invest in ordinary shares in a company. And that's the right to the return of capital on a winding up. Now, if the team has actually come to the conclusion that there's no product market fit or a competitor protocol has launched, so it's now not viable to continue what they're working on, you know, whatever the reason is, if they have come to that conclusion that it's now no longer sensible to continue to use that capital to deploy the project, morally, there should be a pause and at least a calling of a meeting with all of those SAFT holders to discuss this is the status of the project and these are the potential scenarios. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that the team makes an executive decision and then communicates it to the SAFT holders. If they were shareholders with typical rights, this is probably the kind of issue that would warrant the calling of a shareholders meeting and presenting of the financials and the business prospects to, at a vote, decide whether the company or the business is put into liquidation or voluntary administration. And then there is the framework usually that the capital is distributed pro rata or subject to the satisfaction of creditors. Usually shareholders come last. But again, with a SAFT, there's generally no statements about ranking in the event of winding up. So without legal frameworks or a lot of sophistication in these SAFTs, if you know the nature of the DAO that you've invested in through a SAFT and you're reading the market and you can see, or you're doubting what their prospects are, there's nothing stopping you initiating a conversation with the team and guiding them in that respect and say, have you done a business review? Can you call a meeting? Can you present the scenarios? what capital and what runway do you have left to deliver on the project, and what are your revised expectations? So I think that you should feel empowered to at least have those conversations, even if you don't have the written rights to have those conversations or to force an outcome. And then if a token is out there, but it's not performing well, or in the case of Tribe and Faye, that they went through a merger and that was meant to be for the benefit of a larger joined lot of communities, I think that this is a real global policy grey area, because I'm not sure if there are still controllers to the token wallets, the token contracts, to effectively decommission the token. But if it can still freely circulate and be traded, the only reasonable actions that, excuse me, a team could take would be to at least approach any centralized exchanges where the tokens are listed and say, we're no longer providing support, we're not supporting a model of governance around this token, excuse me, and our intention is to wind it down. And you know, that kind of announcement, if people aren't already aware of that trajectory of the project, could almost be like front running. And for people to get wind of those conversations happening to the centralized exchanges could mean that the people who are not staying up to date with the news, they basically, their investment goes to nil, or you get some short trading to profit on the movement as it winds down. I don't know that there's any global action on this. It's not really boiling up to policy discussions on how you wind a token down, or whether the standards, whether there should always be a controller, so that in effect that can be done. But there is talk at least about DAOs and their purposes, and being more specific as to whether the intention is that it's forevermore an operational DAO because you always want to keep a community together, or if it's a bespoke DAO. So once the protocol is built and the functionality is built, the utility will forever exist. And to the extent that you do need governance around it, or a token that reflects that utility value of the protocol, that might allow something to circulate. But it's more about defining whether it's bespoke and whether it should have a plan to wind down its governance token and convert to something differently, or it's ongoing. I might just pause there for any reactions and comments while I get a drink of water as well.
Johnny, I'd have a couple of points there. So what you're talking about there, and I'm not coming from a legal perspective, but looking at it, it's a question of ethics in terms of a moral code and in terms of how the DAO is designed in the first place. And I think there's enough things that you've said there in terms of the wind down context piece, that there's a case here for looking at a regulatory functional equivalence type test as to what would a reasonable person expect in this space, and build that into the actual design of the DAO structure itself.
And even our LawFi DAO rules, we deal with that any assets of our Treasury are to be distributed to a DAO with a similar purpose, or another not-for-profit entity, but it doesn't actually provide any prompting governance processes, or at each time, you know, every 6 months, or when there's a market, you know, a significant market event. There's nothing in our rules that makes us stop, consider it, come up with those scenarios and communicate it to our potentially global members. So maybe that is something that we should consider in our constitution. Or Miles, do you think that any of the general or model templates across unincorporated associations and mutuals could really stack up to give those sorts of obligations upon at least the office bearers of an association?
That's a very good question. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of working out. I don't think there's any simple answer to that. So put it on the to-do list.
That's right. That's right. Okay, well, I know that we're at 9 o'clock. I just welcome any last questions if you have them, or otherwise reflect on what we've discussed today, and feel free to send any ideas through in the meantime to jp@lawfidao.com, including specific working group scopes, but we're going to start getting into the meat from next week. So thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Can I ask a quick question before you go, Jenny? Just, does any of this actually apply to, like, a lot of the law you're discussing seems to be pretty relevant for a lot of the tokenomics areas that are developing, because I've been talking to people in the licensing area just about all crypto turning into a security. And it would seem that a lot of the stuff you're discussing actually will be relevant to that if it does go that direction. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, the token mapping exercise that's now underway in Australia, we hope will provide some clarity on when a token is a security, even if it's got multi-purposes in its use. So I don't know enough about where the policymakers are wanting to take the token mapping exercise after it's done. But I think that if we all have input into it and make sensible contributions, we'll hopefully have a better policy framework than if we weren't involved.
Okay, one other quick question. You said at the inaugural, or one of the, I think the first one you did of these, that there was some risk for people getting in at this point because you're obviously under the highlight of being in the know. Do you think it also will put you in the forefront for being more protected from a legal point of view because you have made the effort to do that?
Yeah, those that opt in to the policy process and early engaging with the regulators, at least the public statements from the regulators are that they will be more friendly towards you. And but I pause at that statement because what we're seeing in the US is that those same statements were made a few years ago, and the people that did early engage effectively gave free and easy discovery for the now legal actions that have ensued. So
XIP.
Early engagement is still to be considered with caution based on the business resources and the risk appetite, but opting into the policy process, even in a sanitized fashion, if you're not speaking to your business specifically, I think still benefits from your experience and insights without bringing your business into the line of inquiry, so to speak.
Thanks.
No worries. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, again. See you soon. Bye.